Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Tirso. Continuing with the design principles series, we are talking about proportion. Proportion differs slightly from the other design principles because it's more of a feeling than it is anything else. You're never going to hear anyone say add more proportion, right? Because that sounds odd. But you will hear the proportion feels off, which brings us to a very subjective side of design. There is an analytical way to approach proportion. There is also a more intuitive way. I will explore both. Here is my guide to using proportion in graphic design. We can't really talk about proportion without talking about scale. They do work hand in hand, but there is a difference. Scale refers to the size of a single element. Proportion is about the relationship between the size of one element in comparison to another. Let's take a look at a quick example. Here is a layout from the balance video. It's symmetrical because both photos are of equal hierarchy. There is actually contrast within the photos. It's not through scale, but instead through the crops. You get an overall view of the space in the hero image and then a moment within the space in the other. If I adjust the proportion of the images like this, it feels off. The smaller image feels disproportionately smaller than the larger image. It's also too small having so much information in that crop. I'll never tell you you have to do anything, but my suggestion, if you're going with a layout like this, you have to balance out the extreme proportion by zooming into that bottom left photo. I'll show you the comparison. I think it still feels off, but the right is less bad. So you could adjust the scale until the proportion feels better. When I say it's subjective, it could be like this or like this, and the proportion is fine in either option. With that said, proportion is more of an assessment principle. All you have to ask is, does a proportion feel off? Yes or no, and it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. I often hear the golden rectangle being talked about when it comes to proportion. I disagree. Here is why. My goal for you is to think on your own and understand design so that you become the tool. Using a golden ratio isn't understanding proportion. It is using a fixed ratio and applying it to everything. It worked for classical paintings and old architecture, but those canvases and paintings didn't change. Your design work changes all the time. We have clients. Most projects are cross-format. So in 2025, there is no one-size-fits-all. You have more to offer the world than measuring your elements with a golden section. So trust the process, not the trick. If you are going to measure, the easiest and most flexible way is to use a grid. This is the content I'll be working with. It's just ingredients. Starting with a modular grid, I'll style the head and then the deck. There are an odd number of rows, so the space above and below aren't equal, but it's okay. This would be the true center, but we place it higher because of what is considered the visual center. Here are our ingredients. I'll lay this out using radial symmetry. There are a few areas that require specific orientations. The top area would require something more horizontal. We don't want text here since text is directly below. The area on the sides would be great for elements that are more vertical. Why? Because orientation affects proportion. With that in mind, let's loosely place what those elements are. Maybe the dragon fruit up here, the scallions on the right. The red pepper is vertical, but I want to distribute the color and the red is too close to the magenta of the dragon fruit, so maybe it's the honey. The lemon would be opposite of the honey since they're similar in color as well. And then the ginger can go down here in the bottom left. Now that everything is loosely placed, you can literally use a grid for just about any size you want. We do want to keep balance in mind. Let's say the dragon fruit takes up 4 modules. 4 modules enough. If you haven't seen my grid videos, the grid is a guide, not a rule. At least that's what I say. And if you're in school, don't go telling your professor Tirso said so. I don't know them and they don't know me. We can center the peppers. The green onions can get bigger. Next, the honey, similar in size. I don't like this handle crashing into the dragon fruit, so I can swap with the green onion. I think I need a smaller ingredient to break up these larger ones. The onions can swap with the ginger, and then the ginger can get bigger. Again, as long as you're mostly using the grid, the proportions are pretty set. Even at this stage, this is 2 modules in width, and so is this one. This is roughly 3 modules, as are these. See? Everything is proportionate and we didn't even measure. All right, we have the pepper. Maybe that swaps with the lemon to separate it from the honey since they're the same color. We'll make it bigger. The ginger and the dragon fruit are a little gnarly in shape versus the lemon and the pepper having cleaner lines. I'm going to swap the lemon and the ginger to balance that out. Let's drop in the captions. We can see that these would easily work if they're all 2 columns. I can also give myself more flexibility by having 2 different widths, either 1 module or 2 modules for the captions. This creates some contrast and we use the grid to keep them proportionate. Back to the layout. Based on how the images currently sit, let's adjust the widths. This is easy now, we just go one by one. The dragon fruit caption can move closer. I'm actually going to flip it so that the shadow is on the right side, which matches the same direction of light as the other images. This is a design principle of unity. The lemon, I'm just going to adjust the rag. For the green onions, it's right next to the caption for ginger. I would want this to run vertically, so I'll simply remove one, and now we have the space. I can rag the caption on the ginger so the width comes in. The red peppers are a little tight vertically. They can be rotated with a horizontal caption. The rag on the honey is pretty egregious. I'll typeset it like this. Just some final adjustments, and there we go. I'm keeping all the type in black because the color from the images carry the page. For this layout, the approach is that no ingredient is more important than the other, so all elements are of similar proportion. This also helps keep the balance with the use of radial symmetry. We love options, so let's try another using a column grid. Check out my video on 5 and 7 column grids if you haven't already. Okay, I've dropped in the head and deck. This time, the ingredients will be paired together. For the rest of the space, we can allocate general regions. Since they're in pairs, we need 3 areas. This top right will probably be vertical. There can be a horizontal next to it so that we have difference in orientation, and then one more in this bottom area. For this area, I can have one of the ingredients break into that space. In the top right, I'm going to use the honey. I just don't like this handle, and the easiest way to get rid of it is bleeding it off the page. This pairs with the lemons. It depends what you're going for, but in this option, the lemons are too small compared to the honey, so we use a size that feels proportionate. We need the caption, and we'll determine the width by using a grid line. I promise you this is fine, but it is too tight. Let's move the honey over a skosh, not a full scooch. Here is a reminder of the next region we allocated, and these are the rest of the ingredients. In the last example, we balanced out color, and we should do the same here. The ginger is closer in color to the lemon and honey, so that should be opposite, and that pairs with the red pepper. You see how the layout just comes together? It's like you have to think, but you also kind of don't have to. Anyway, here are our peppers. We have a lot of space to work with, so they can get bigger. Our ginger goes in the bottom left since we wanted to break into this space. The peppers are feeling a little big, but I am liking this movement happening here. We can use the peppers to emphasize that like this. Now the caption, it's aligned to the margin, but maybe it can be aligned to the deck instead. The world may never know. Okay, let's fit the rest of our ingredients. Although the green onion actually fits nicely in that pocket, the dragon fruit should move further away from the red pepper in this bottom corner. It's nice that it almost matches the grid columns, but I am going to remove one so I have more space for the caption and the green onion. Not too much space left, but I can fit one green onion across here. I'll flip it so the shadow goes in the right direction. The last caption, which I purposely wanted in this area, and here's why. The tops of the captions are essentially spread across most of the page from top to bottom, and also left to right. I didn't really know how to explain this thought process as I was doing this, but now you know. Let's remove the grid and finish the layout. It's assumed which images go with each caption, but we're not actually showing it visually. We can do that through common region. Final touches, and there we go, a fully proportionate layout put together because we used a grid. Some designers don't like to use a grid, and that's okay. In the words of Yoda, you must unlearn what you have learned. But just because we're living off vibes doesn't mean it is the Wild West. There should still be somewhat of a process. For this, I'll anchor the head and deck at the top so we have the rest of the page to work with. Here is our honey. It naturally has a lot of movement to it. your eye can't help but follow the stick to the trail of honey, leading you to the honeycomb. This video isn't about movement, but we can utilize the movement to guide the viewer's eye. For those of you that design websites or mobile apps, the general idea is to design in an F shape because we read left to right and top to bottom. When it comes to print design, you have a little bit more flexibility because the reader isn't scrolling. So how would you place this honey to guide them throughout the page? The simplest approach is to use a diagonal. Since the honey already faces the other direction, let's go with that. And we don't have to be that accurate here. Remember, we're designing with vibes. So something like this, it's almost better when it's not exact. All right, let's make the honey feel gigantic by scaling it up. It already feels pretty big. As I said earlier, proportion is about relationships. We do already have a size reference for the honey, which is how big we know it to be in real life. In regards to design, we can use proportion through emphasis by giving a visual reference. If I drop this ginger similar in size, the honey doesn't look big anymore. It looks like we've zoomed into the ingredients, which isn't the goal. When I scale the ginger down in size, now the honey looks big again. This is proportion at work. Conversely, the ginger looks smaller. When you play with proportion like this, it gives the design this push-pull effect. We have a reference in everyday life on how big things are supposed to be, so it makes something like this more visually interesting. That's what makes a giant spoon at an Instagram museum so fun, because it shifts our sense of reality. Back to our layout, we can use this area for the caption and add another ingredient. I decided to use the ones that are all similar in color. Even without a grid, in print we always have margins. I can push this to a line. I'll put these side by side so you can decide which feels better to you. For me, the space feels off in the option to the right. The giant honey is already enough visual interest to carry the page. The other ingredients are already getting focused through scale, and I don't think it's necessary to give them additional focus through white space. So this feels better. The honey needs a caption. If I match it to the other captions, the proportion feels off. The white space around it isn't helping, so we need the caption to take up more space. I'm going to use the sans serif type I'm using in the deck for the subhead. I'm using the thin weight because the text says gentle. If your type can emphasize what the words are saying, it is always a great idea. I'm actually going to use the deck styling down here, and then I need to change the deck copy so they don't match because they're not the same type of information. I think the page could use more dimension. If I add a border to this, that helps. The movement of the honey is going right to left, so left aligning this caption could work. I mentioned this in the Gestalt Principles video, another situation where it's technically left aligned, but visually it looks closer to full justified because we're not getting that much of a rag. I can force a rag by adding line breaks, and now we're getting more of that left alignment visually. I want to emphasize this moment of overlap. I could extend the box down. I like how it frames the honey, but it feels like too much border, so let's go back. The border in theory needs to get thicker so it has some contrast with the subhead. Normally I would say this works, and it does, but since we're talking about proportion, let's just use it to determine this border. I'll zoom in. We're already pretty far into the layout, which means we've already created proportions within the layout, like the cap height of the subhead. I'll adjust the padding around to match, and then the border to match as well. Okay, let's send it to the back, and let's move it up so we can read it. If you're thinking, Tirso, this is looking a little crazy, trust the process, not the trick. I know the border is super thick, which makes it heavy, but we can balance out heaviness through white space. The border just needs to get lighter. You could keep it a simple color. There is a lot of color already in the bottom part of the page. If anything, I want color in the head. For the border, I can add lines like this, which adds white. Hopefully now it's looking less crazy. To finish this off, there is one last element of proportion that you can work with, and that is your viewport. In print design, the viewport is your page size. This honey can get even bigger. Now it feels giant because it's visually larger than the page, which forces your reader to imagine the rest of the image. The space changed in this bottom right, so I can cheat over the other two ingredients, and that's it. All right, that is proportion and graphic design. Proportion is about relationships. It is also about feeling. So be good to your elements and be good to each other.